Our world is so big that virtually any part of the planet still has places and objects untouched by time and people. When we get to enter these places, we get transported way back into the past. It seems that time has been standing still and nothing has been happening there for a whole century. No progress, no wars, nothing. It's still the early 20th century. And it's one of these amazing places where time seems to stand still that we'll get transported to today. A few months ago, an ordinary French family decided to buy a house in the quiet village of Belabre in southwestern France. But the house came with a mystery. It looked like an old house from the mid-19th century with many rooms, long hallways, wine cellars, and a large plot of land. They noticed that some windows were visible from the outside, yet the new owners couldn't find them inside the house. Then the owners realized that there was a room in the house with no entrance. As it turned out later, it was walled up with bricks almost 100 years ago. Of course, the new owners couldn't ignore it and decided to find out why and who hid this mysterious room. But the most important question was, what was inside that room? Having dismantled the masonry, the new owners traveled back in time and locked eyes with the first owner of this house. The walled-in passage hid the bedroom of 22-year-old French Army Lieutenant Uber Rosheru. It was his photograph hanging on the wall that greeted the new owners of the house. As they later learned, Uber served in a dragoons cavalry regiment in World War I and died in the village of Locher, Flanders, a region in Belgium, on April 26, 1918. The man was initially buried in a British cemetery, but was moved to a graveyard in his hometown village of Belabre in 1922 and awarded a medal for courage in battle after his death. The man's parents, heartbroken from the loss of their beloved son, couldn't come to terms with his death and decided not to touch anything in his room. They bricked up the entrance to his room, thus keeping everything exactly the way Uber left it in 1915 on the day he left the house for the last time when he went to the front. The lieutenant's household promised each other that they'd never, and under no pretext, enter his bedroom. Time went by, and another 13 years later, in 1935, the Rosheru family had to move out of their estate and leave Belabre. His parents gave the house to the French general Eugène Brideau on the condition that no one would touch the room for at least 500 years. Brideau promised to honor the wishes of the previous owners and make sure that the room doesn't get opened as long as he's alive. But as we all know, World War II began in 1939, and thus Uber's bedroom was under supervision for only a brief period of time. France fell to the onslaught of the German army, and General Brideau began to cooperate with the appointed German government, holding a high position since 1940. When the war was over, the general fled to Spain to escape punishment, but he was detained there in 1955 and sentenced to death, after which the house was confiscated and put up for sale. It was purchased by the granddaughter of General Brideau, together with her husband, Daniel Fabre. But the new owners of the house knew and remembered the Rosheru family's request and also didn't touch the room for the deceased lieutenant. Daniel and his wife have lived in the house for almost 70 years, since 1955 and until 2014, when Daniel passed away. A whole generation grew up here, children and grandchildren of the family, but no one ever entered the secret room. From 2014 to 2020, the house didn't have any owners. When the new owners bought it at an auction, they knew nothing about the 102-year-old tradition of not entering a room in the house. So they opened it without giving it any thought. But after seeing what was inside, they couldn't stay indifferent. All the objects in the room were true antiques. At first glance, they seemed to tell us the life story of the former owner. Time has stopped here a long while ago. The portrait of Uber Rosheru hangs on the wall as if welcoming the new owners. His drawings and books, which are almost 110 years old, are lying on the table. His medals, a military cross, and the Order of the Legion of Honor lie on the young lieutenant's bed, as well as the photographs of his friends, many of whom also didn't get to return home from the same war. Some things have long been eaten by moths, such as an old uniform in the middle of the room, exactly where Uber left it. There's a bottle with earth on the table. The inscription on it says, "The earth of Flanders, in which our dear child fell and which kept his remains for 4 years." An old cavalry sword still hangs on the wall, and an old bed stands under the portrait. Even the chair that the owner of this room once sat in is intact so many years later. There are also many amazing antiques on the table, such as a candlestick, an ashtray, old photographs, and knives. A lot of books and 2 pairs of Uber's boots, old watches and pistols from the late 19th century, and even cigars and many more interesting and rare things have all been preserved. The new owner said that when you go inside this room, you get a feeling that its owner just stepped out for a short while and should return soon. According to them, they're not planning on changing anything in Uber's bedroom, but they also don't see a point in keeping it closed. Instead, they plan on turning it into a museum in memory of Uber Rosheru, thus honoring his family's wishes and sharing with the world a piece of history that suddenly fell into their hands. Local officials are sympathetic to the new owner's decision and say that no matter how much they'd like to continue the 102-year-old tradition, the room is legally private property and belongs to the owners of the house. Real portals in time aren't easy to come across, but looking at this room, which is more than a century old, one understands that they could touch history.